Today we welcome Michael Burns, CEO of the Princess Margaret Foundation, which is the fundraising arm of the Princess Margaret Cancer Center, the world-famous cancer center in Toronto. Michael has started out his career 20 years in the financial services industry, and in that capacity became chair of the Michael Garron Hospital and led the fundraising of the largest single donation to a community hospital in Canada at the time, $50 million from the Garron family. Then he went on to be CEO of the Invictus Games and created that from nothing up into this massive enterprise, national enterprise, opening ceremony, closing ceremony, star-studded event, and an amazing way to draw attention to the situations of our ill and injured athletes, military and their families. Then moved on to Princess Margaret, but was also way back when one of the founders of the True Patriot Love Foundation. So, Mike, you got a long history both in the corporate sector and in the philanthropy sector. And just wondering to start off, when this whole thing hit, you've got a big organization, 110 people dedicated to fundraising for Princess Margaret Cancer Center. What did you do? Like, how did that unfold for you?
Yeah, listen, there's no question. First of all, Ian, it's great to be here with you and Ken. Always enjoy our conversations, and certainly thrilled to be a part of your new podcast series. Certainly this happened fast, faster than I think anybody expected it to, especially as we were sort of tracking the virus first starting in China and going abroad from there. I would say that we probably had a better line of sight than most because we are in the healthcare sector, and we knew that our cancer center, as well as the rest of UHN, had even weeks in advance of the province and the feds making the decision to effectively shut the economy down, that they were working around the clock to build capacity, because there was a real fear that there was going to be a surge and that we were going to end up looking a lot more like New York as opposed to some of the other places around the world. And so that all being said, we had already well begun and undertaken a couple of things that were really important in advance of the pandemic. And again, these were not initiated because of the pandemic. The first is that we were in fact going to be testing starting April 1 of this year, a work from home policy. So we're actually going to give our employees, and we've got just over 100 of them, the option for 2 days a month to be able to work from home. So that means you've got to have a laptop. It means you've got to have the right technology and other capabilities to be able to do that, so that you can stay at home and that there's no interruptions or knock-on effects with the work that may be happening at our head office. And so this obviously accelerated that, and it wasn't just a few that were going to have some time off and work from home. Everybody starting around March 15th were working from home remotely, and we knew for a fair period of time, and of course now we're 10 weeks of this. So in many respects, and again, I give the team all the credit in the world, we were well prepared for this, although it wasn't the reason we were planning for it. And so I would say that the transition worked extremely well. I think the other thing that was really important, and this starts with the leadership team, and it cascades down to the rest of the organization, including the board, including your volunteers and other supporters, is that we didn't panic. We knew things were going to change. We knew that we had some information, but not all the information. But what was absolutely central from day one was how we were going to prioritize our decision making. And it really came down to three things. First, our people. We said to them repeatedly, it's all about self. You've got to keep yourself physically and mentally strong throughout this period of time, because if you do that, then you're going to be positioned to help your family. Many of our colleagues have young families at home. Some of them have parents that they're living with, and in some cases they're caring for elderly grandparents. And so it's absolutely important that they prioritize themselves first so that they can take care of their families. That's got to be their second priority. And then the third priority was work. And we always believed, and still 10 weeks into this, that if you can get those first two right, then you know what, you're going to continue to be productive. And so, that is something that we have been overemphasizing since day one. And I also think too, that it's reassuring to the team that work right now. Well, it is always important. There are other things that are of higher value and things that they need to deal with first. And I think that's provided them with a lot of comfort, as well as reassurance that the management team has their best interest first and foremost.
That's great, Mike. And so do you think that different charities, that was how you were affected and how you responded, which I think, a lot more premeditated than most organizations around the world. But do you think in the philanthropy sector, different charities will be affected in different ways? Hospitals, universities, other, body part organizations, that kind of thing.
No question. You look at Canada, we've got about 35 or 36 million people. We have about 87,000 registered charities in Canada. And the one thing that I will say is that most, if not all of those charities rely largely on events or third-party activities. And this pandemic has done one thing. If it's done one thing really well, it's exposed the charitable sector in a way that it was not prepared to do. I'm sorry?
You have a lot of events.
No question. We have a lot of events. However, we also have probably one of the most diverse and comprehensive fundraising platforms in the country. So if you look at our total net revenue, only about 22% of it is exposed when it comes to events. Because what we also have, in addition to the events, is that we also have major gifts. We've got estate giving. We've got crowdfunding. We've got lottery revenue. We're heavily invested in commercialization. We have investment income. And we have other ways that we can generate revenue. Most of the charities that I mentioned, the 87,000 charities, raise less than 100,000 a year. And they are almost entirely reliant on events, making up 60, 70, 80% or more of their revenue. Now, most of them people have never heard about, yet, even $100,000 in communities across the country help provide relief or support that's critically important where governments or other agencies, can't fill all the gaps. So I think, coming out of this, there is going to be a lot of winners, and there's going to be actually a few winners, but there's going to be a lot of losers, both in our sector and other sectors. But it does underscore the fact that charities have got to be thinking about how they conduct their business, how they can diversify, how they can innovate, and they've got to make those priorities. I think for so long, charities have just taken it for granted that their events, their galas, their golf tournaments, the other things that they've been doing will just continue to happen year over year. And the reality is that isn't going to be the case. I think, if I look at if I were to break down the sector, I think healthcare, you're going to have largely winners because obviously the need is there, particularly to support frontline workers or research into COVID, the virus, as well as related treatments off of that disease. I think food security, people that are focused on that are going to win. And then people in the human services support area are likely areas of our sector that are going to probably do better, largely because the attention is going to be focused on those aspects. Some of the areas where I think, I fear the worst are, the arts sector. I think they're going to have a really difficult time. Many of them rely on, gate revenue. They're not contributing to COVID research or a vaccine or, people who are suffering and are in pain. I think those sectors are going to, over the foreseeable future, are going to struggle for sure.
Mike, I just wanted a little more detail. Your organization runs one of the most successful lotteries around, the home lottery. And how are sales of that, and how are things going in that to specific area?
So we've been running the home lottery now for 25 years. We were already in the market with our spring lottery when the pandemic hit. It was our largest lottery in the 25-year history we've been doing this. We had 530,000 tickets in the marketplace. I can tell you that when the pandemic hit and offices, schools were closed, we saw the bottom fall out of our ticket sales over the first 4 to 5 days. Our vendor called us and said, look, guys, it's probably been more than a decade since you didn't have a sellout. We are now forecasting that we will not meet a sellout this spring, and that we will likely come in considerably less. That's a big hit to our business, largely because that money, not only does it generate so much money for cancer research, but it's undesignated dollars. So we get to decide with our research colleagues where we're going to spend that money for that next big breakthrough and so forth. Interesting enough, we pivoted. We changed up our marketing mix. We doubled down on digital. And literally within a matter of a few weeks after the pandemic hit, the forecast had changed. And I'm excited to share with you and anyone who's listening, if they haven't already heard, that we sold out before the early bird deadline. We sold all 530,000 tickets, making it the largest sellout in our 25-year history. Oh, and so again, I think it's a testament to the team and its ability to react. I also think that it's a testament that people who are touched by cancer, and we know that 1 in 2 of us are going to get it, everybody is going to be affected by it, is that we have a groundswell of support and a base there that realize that cancer is not going to slow down because of COVID, and that our work must continue to go forward. So again, we hope we're going to have the same success in the fall. We're going to have actually even more tickets. It'll be our largest to date. And again, being able to deliver on that makes up for some of the other areas of the business that inevitably are going to be impacted because of COVID.
Mike, I'd just love you to talk about donor cultivation. It always used to be a face-to-face, in-person meeting to be able to begin to cultivate a donor. That all has to change, and that's all going to change. Just wondering your perspective on that.
Yeah, I think you're right. We've obviously, one of the things we set out to do right from the very start of this is, especially with our longtime major gift supporters, is this is the time to be proactive. This is not the time to retreat. This is the time to get on the phone and talk to Mr. and Mrs. Smith and not ask them for a gift, not remind them of their pledge payment. It's a time to ask them how they're doing. How can we help? Can we tell you how our cancer center is dealing with cancer patients today in light of the fact that we're operating under this COVID virus? And so the team did a very good job of proactively reaching out by phone, by email, and other means. But to get to your point, I think in part we're going to reimagine this. We've got to think about how do we leverage technology to engage our donors. We've got to go where they are, and more importantly, we got to go where they feel most comfortable and safe. And I think at the end of the day, they are. My view is they're not any less committed to our cause, but how we interact with them, leveraging technology, making them feel safe and engaged is going to be important. So at the right time, when we can get back out in front of them, we can pick up where we were.
Mike, one of the things that you talked about was that charities were going to have to think about in the future was the diversification of portfolios, which is, a term from your financial services past as well. If you do a search on charities for, cancer on Google, you'll get 1 million different cancer charities. Is consolidation going to play a role in the future?
Yeah, I think it will be. There's no question. I mean, we've already seen it with a couple of examples with Canadian Cancer Society merging with Breast Cancer Canada, and then more recently they picked up Prostate Cancer Canada. Unfortunately for them, they have what I would say is a relatively old model of fundraising that hasn't changed dramatically over the last number of decades. They have publicly stated quite clearly to government and the public and others that they're forecasting that they will lose up to $100 million this year. And so that's not only going to impact their ability to deliver services that they do to needy cancer patients, to provide summer camps for kids, but also to support the research that they have committed to investing in. So we're anticipating that the money we receive from external charities like the Canadian Cancer Society or Terry Fox are either going to be slashed or their payment plans are going to be extended. And so that's going to put more pressure on the foundations at these cancer centers to step up and do better. And so we're thinking through, how do we do that with the activities that we do, but are there new models out there, whether it's consolidations, perhaps mergers, or other ways that we can be doing our business better to get outside of Ontario, across the country and around the world. I'm happy to say that a lot of that work or a lot of that thinking had happened, months in advance of the pandemic hitting. But I think the other key thing to here is that there always has been this double standard between the traditional for-profit versus non-profit company. A lot of organizations speak to the how efficient can you raise a dollar, or how cheaply can you do it, and yeah, that's important, there's no question. But I think what's more important today than ever before is what impact are you making with the dollars you're raising. And the second thing is resilience. Like, nobody tests the resilience of a charity. And if that charity can't withstand a pandemic or something else that's going to come at us in the future, what good is it to the cause if it stumbles or goes out of business? And so, we talk about the resiliency of the airline sector. We talked about the resiliency of, the hospitality sector. But we never talk about the resiliency of all of these charities that, quite frankly, have not evolved, have not invested in its people and its technology in order to diversify its activities. And as I mentioned up top, the pandemic has really exposed a lot of the weaknesses in our sector. And, as a sector, we're going to have to learn from that.
It's really interesting. I think there's a lot of optimism even around this whole conversation. Just recently there was an example of how Terry Fox Foundation got together with Adidas and they sold out a pair of running shoes almost immediately. And in a time when, quote unquote, retail sales are supposed to be down. And so I was just wondering what some of your plans for Princess Margaret is moving forward, thinking that, some of the events are going to have to be reinvented.
Yeah, so a couple of things I would say to that. Obviously, our event portfolio is changing. We are, we've had to postpone some. We also will be moving virtually for our big signature event, the Ride and the Walk this year. We're pushing the Ride into the last weekend in August. It's going to be a one-day event. It's the largest peer-to-peer fundraising event in Canada. Just to give you an idea, when you go virtual, as you all know, the great thing is you're not limited to boundaries or jurisdictions. And so we're going to use this opportunity to, in a sense, obviously engage our past riders and teams and get them signed up and fundraising. But since we're, not landlocked and it's not going to be, a direct ride from Toronto to Niagara Falls over 2 days, we now have open to us anybody who's a rider. And so we're going to reposition it as Canada's Ride to Conquer Cancer. And we're going to be encouraging anybody from across the country, from St. John's to Yellowknife to Victoria, to on the day that we choose to do it, that they get outside and do their own ride and support cancer research at Princess Margaret and other places across the country. The walk's very similar as well. That'll be going online. We've made a massive commitment and launched this recently, new partnership to get into the e-gaming space, and really kind of taking advantage of what's happening there with all of the gamers, not just here in Canada, but around the world. And I guess the theme of what the big change is that you really have to understand and be the very best in class when it comes to virtual events and games and other activities. And I cannot imagine us in the foreseeable future, and maybe never, actually ever coming up with an event that we can't also replicate online. In fact, I suspect we'll start with virtual, and then we'll go to say, okay, what does this look like if we did an in-person event? Because that's, that, again, that's where the world's going. The pandemic is, again, exposing that opportunity to us, and we're going to be taking full advantage of it. So lots of changes in the mix for events. But I think, people are going to have to pivot off of those traditional galas and those, quite frankly, I would say tired events that were your bread and butter. If you can't put more than 500 people in a room or 50, you're in big trouble.
Right. Mike, just as a last question, you've talked about the shifts at Princess Margaret. You've talked about the shifts in philanthropy in general. You've led a number of organizations. As I said, you were chair of Michael Garron Foundation, CEO of Invictus Games. You're now CEO of the Princess Margaret Foundation. What are the new rules for leaders? Like how do you think leaders have to shift going forward?
Well, I think in certainly based on my experience and more recently going through this, the one thing that we made a commitment to do was to over-index on communications. That we said to people, we may not have all the information, but we're going to share with you what we have. And if you want extreme transparency, then you're going to see the moves we're making in real time. And we're going to explain to you why we're doing what we're doing when it happens. I think the other thing is that, especially at a time like this, when people are worried about their jobs, worried about their health, worried about their families and their friends, that leaders have to show empathy, and that they have to, they've got to understand what it's like to be in the shoes of their employees and their colleagues. I also think too that work in many respects, because of what we've gone through, has become more personal. My calls on Zoom or Skype I'm looking at my colleagues in their living rooms. I'm seeing their kids. I see the cat run in front of the computer screen. We had a great exercise we did 3 weeks ago where the management team got together and we put care packages together, and we divided up the entire team, and the management team went to everybody's home. And I'm not sure we would have done that if we hadn't been under these extraordinary circumstances. But for me in particular, and I think the others would share it, is for us to be able to go to the homes of where our people work and see their lives. I think it was really beneficial, because it creates a deeper relationship with these men and women who we rely on so much for. So I think as leaders, it's nobody expects you to have all the answers. We're all flawed. It's okay to show that weakness, because what I would say to anyone who's listening, including the board, when we meet with them next month, is even though we have been working remotely for the better part of 10, 11 weeks, I can tell you that this team has never been closer. And I think, as we said from the outset, that if we do this right, and we show the leadership and provide that confidence and the support that they need, and that they know that we're making decisions that start with their interests first, that we're going to come out of this much stronger than when we started.
That's interesting. Yeah. So the focus is on the personal side of leadership, and really engaging your people in a way that they haven't been engaged before.
No question. I think the other thing too is, when this all broke, it's like, guys, it's okay. Guess what? Things are going to change. We're probably not going to have the year that we thought we were going to have. Events are going to change. It's okay, right? We're going to work through this together, and just also recognize and have some perspective that everyone on the planet is going through the same challenge. This isn't sector, specific. Everybody's going to do it. So let's not, and we said it, let's not let a good crisis go to waste. So while we are working on our business, let's also have an eye to what's the new world going to look like. and where can we go and where can we win? And we've spent a lot of time, carved out lots of opportunities for discussions, both at the management team and elsewhere within the organization, to reflect on that, to talk about, actually it's interesting, when we did our sort of, at least with the management team, we actually didn't start with ideas, we came up with questions. And there was no bad question. And we came up with almost 150 different questions in various areas, and there was no limits. And then, of course, we distilled those down to a smaller number and then bucketed them in different categories. But, again, I think coming out of this, we've learned a lot about each other. I think we're a stronger team. And I think there's, a half a dozen or more great ideas and things that we're going to pursue that are going to allow us at the end of the day, raise more awareness, more money that's going to deliver more impact for cancer research here in Canada and around the world.
That's great, Mike. We've worked with you for a long time. We've known you a long time. It's not the least bit surprising to us that Princess Margaret Foundation is weathering the storm. Not just weathering the storm, but actually coming out the other side is bigger and better than it was going in. I want to thank you a lot for talking to us today. This was a great conversation. For charities all across Canada, there's lots of good advice in here. Michael Burns, CEO of Princess Margaret Foundation, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Great to be with you and Ken again. Thanks.
Thank you.